Welcome everybody. I'm going to turn off my Wi-Fi here because I'm really not sure how well that's going to go. We'll see if that decision works out for me. All right, welcome everybody. Really excited to be here at the first annual Framework Summit, and also excited to talk to you about Elm in 2018. So as previously mentioned, I work for a company called No-Red Inc. We make writing software for English teachers, and students have used our site to answer over 5 billion questions, so we get a lot of traffic. We also build a lot of really custom UIs, and we build them in Elm. So the Elm programming language compiles to JavaScript, and the reason we're here at Framework Summit, despite being a programming language, is that typically speaking, people use Elm sort of in place of a framework, because it comes with enough batteries included that people don't really in practice actually need a framework if they're using Elm. So at No-Red Inc., we've been using Elm for a couple years now. 2015 was our first Elm commit. We're now up to about 250,000 lines of Elm code, so we've been using it for quite a while and also quite extensively. And we have 26 people at the company who are either like full-time using Elm or part-time. Some people are kind of more on the full stack side. So although we have quite a lot of Elm in production, we do still have some legacy JavaScript. And so when we run this code in production, we use rollbar to monitor our errors. So whenever we get like a production runtime exception, rollbar will log that and we'll find out about it. And so since we've started using Elm, we've seen sort of a difference in trend in the exceptions that it's logging. So since 2015, we've had about 60,000 errors logged by our JavaScript, and Elm, it's not actually 0. It was 0 for a while, but now it's 0 pixels on the graph. So it's not that it's literally never crashed, but it's so infrequent that we basically don't think about it anymore. So we're going to talk about some of the ways that Elm does that. So this has been pretty cool. It's sort of like one less thing to worry about is like our code ever crashing. Another thing that's nice about Elm is sort of it has this delightful compiler that's sort of enforcing the guarantees that enable us to run without runtime exceptions. So here's an example. It's like a piece of Elm code calling this function called getFullName, passing it this big record. Now let's say we make a little mistake. Instead of phone number, it says phone number. We just make a little typo there. What's going to happen? Well, when we go to compile this, Elm's compiler is going to say type mismatch. The argument to function getFullName is causing a mismatch. It'll have like the line numbers so you can see exactly where the problem went wrong. Or if you're using like Atom or VS Code integration, it'll tell you right there in the editor. And then it says function getFullName is expecting the argument to be some stuff followed by phone number. It kind of elides the rest of that big record, but it is phone number. Hint, I compared the record fields and found some potential typos, phone number and phone number. So it's really like giving us as much help as it possibly could to like find what the problem is. So this is one example, but there's a whole bunch of examples like this of just the compiler being really nice and friendly and helpful. And this is one of the reasons we love using Elm. So these are like some of the benefits of Elm is like kind of no runtime exceptions in practice, or at least so infrequent that we don't even have to think about it. A really delightful, helpful compiler. A cohesive package ecosystem. So Elm being a programming language, it has its own totally separate package ecosystem where you don't have to worry about like, is this ES6 or not, whatever. It's all Elm. It's all conforming to the same standard. It's really nice. A really helpful community. So one of the things I got to give a shout out to is the Elm Slack. If you join Elm Slack, you get dropped into the beginners channel where people are basically answering questions, usually within like a few seconds of people asking them. Really, really helpful people. I'm just really glad to be a part of the community. Of course, there's always costs that come with any technology choice. Everything has trade-offs. So let's talk about some of those. So one is learning a new language. Like Elm is not JavaScript. It's just going to take a little bit of learning to sort of come to grips with a new language. It's also a smaller ecosystem. Like yeah, Elm does have its own separate ecosystem of packages, and yeah, you can use JavaScript interop. But let's be real. Like nothing is as big as npm. So if you're writing Elm code and you want to get all these benefits, you're going to want to use the Elm package manager. But on the other hand, if you want to get access to the giant ecosystem of npm, that does require using JavaScript interop. Web API coverage, so things like service workers and IndexedDB and WebRTC, things like that. Elm doesn't have first-class primitives at the language level for all those things. So some of those things are not covered yet, and you do have to use JavaScript interop to interact with those. These are all costs of using Elm. Couple more. One is compile time. So Elm is a compile to JS language. That means there's a compiler. And over the last couple of years, people who've been using it at work and getting bigger and bigger code bases have seen their compile times naturally go up and up. Bundle sizes, again, compiling to JavaScript, there's overhead associated with that. And finally, hiring. This is the one I get asked about all the time. People say like, hey, if I use Elm, like how am I going to hire anybody? So let's talk about some of these. Elm 0.19 just came out last month before that maybe. You can read about it at the Elm blog. And it brought a lot of new features that address some of these costs. Doesn't get it down to zero cost, but it does at least address some of them. So to talk about these, I'm going to use an example, the real world example. So shout out to the authors of this. They're actually at the conference, which is great. It's cool to meet them yesterday. And basically the purpose of this is to provide sort of like a to-do MVC style application that demonstrates building like an actual sizable application in a couple of different frameworks, different technologies. They have both front-end and back-end API specs, CSS styles, all these different things. So you can just kind of focus on like, what's it like to build, for example, a single page application in Elm. So it's got about 10 routes. The Elm implementation has about 4,000 lines of code, like 33 modules. And it's just got like sign up, sign in. You got like a feed. You can look at people's profiles. You can edit your settings, post articles, edit articles, all these different things. Like it's a pretty substantial amount of functionality. It's not a huge app, but it's substantial. So I'm going to do a quick demo. And I've sort of bravely turned off my Wi-Fi because I don't, it's like hotel Wi-Fi. What are you going to do? But I did go ahead and ahead of time, I cloned this single page app example into a new repo. So this is the code for that real world example app. So right now I have basically nothing because this is just a fresh checkout. So I have not run any commands. I have not run like npm installed or like any equivalent of that. And from scratch, I'm just going to use the Elm binary. Like this is the Elm CLI that just comes with Elm. And run Elm make to build the entire application, all of its dependencies, everything. And I'm going to add the -- optimize flag, which means it's being built for production mode. And I'll talk about what that does later. So as you can see, this all took on stage 0.6 seconds to build the entire application, 10 routes, everything, generate all the JavaScript, check all the types, check all the dependencies, install everything from scratch, nothing even installed from a fresh checkout, half a second. So we got better at that in the new release. Compile times kind of went down. Another thing you might notice is that I did this with my Wi-Fi turned off. So it says, warning, I normally check package.elmlang.org for new packages, but my request failed. Are you offline? I will try to continue anyway. So it actually supports now building completely offline, including installing packages offline. Like I can install new packages just as easily because it's basically all reading from my local cache. Any package I've ever downloaded, it's just going to have to do no extra work. It doesn't even need an internet connection to use it. So this is one example of something that used to be sort of a historical like cost and a concern like compile times, but which has now gotten a lot better with Elm 19. Build speed also has sort of like gotten better at scale. So one example we heard about was a company that's got a little under 50,000 lines of Elm code at production, 227 modules, and for them, a scratch build of the same form that you just saw here was a little under 2 seconds. So it went up from like half a second to slightly under 2 seconds. So just think about for a second like how long it takes you to build from scratch at work. Like those of you who are not using Elm, and think about like how much of a delta there is there. I'm guessing if you're like me, that would be a pretty substantial delta. This is to build from scratch, and of course incremental builds are much, much faster than this. So build speed really, really got better. Let's talk about bundle size. So this is another concern that people have had historically is like, hey, you're a different programming language. Like there's going to be overhead compiling to JavaScript. Like how big does that make your asset bundles? So again, looking at this, the real world example. So this is 10 routes, 33 modules, about 4,000 lines of code. If you bring up the demo, which is linked to in the repo, you can take a look at the network tab and just see how big the compiled JavaScript bundle is. Here it is. I'll just highlight that number, 29 kilobytes. That's not how much Elm added. That's the whole application. 10 routes, 33 modules, 4,000 lines of code. So again, a reasonable question worth asking is like, how many frameworks are that small? Like before you even write a line of application code, this is the entire app. So like we're pretty happy about that. Did a lot of work to like get those sizes down, and it seems to have really paid off. So like how does that possible? Like how do you get like such a small number? The answer is function level dead code elimination, and this kind of ties into the things we've been talking about so far. So if I run like elm install rt-feldman /elm css, which is the CSS and JS library, or sorry, CSS and Elm library that I maintain, slip of the tongue. So this is like a pretty big package. It exposes like 700 functions across various different modules. Well, the cool thing is if I only use like 30 of those, like I'm using like background color and flexbox type stuff, those are the only functions that are going to get compiled into my output bundle. And it doesn't matter what modules they're in. Module structure is completely irrelevant to this form of dead code elimination. So everything else just gets eliminated from the bundle. So when I'm building that application, it doesn't really matter how many dependencies I install, how many modules they've got. All that matters is like what I'm using. Everything else gets thrown out. And again, all I have to do to get this is just to add the -- optimize flag. This is not like something that requires an entire separate build system. In fact, I don't even have a build tool in that repo. I just say like, hey, here's the commands to run. You just copy paste them like I just did on the terminal. So it's really, really lightweight. So comparing these, it's sort of like no dead code elimination, let's say it's this big, module level DCE, AKA tree shaking, which I know is like, this is sort of like the future, depending on who you ask. But for me, like the present is actually much better than that. Function level dead code elimination is like just many steps ahead of what module level DCE can get you. And it's something that we just have in the entire Elm ecosystem. Like every single package, there's no like, do you have ES6 imports or not? Nothing. It's just the entire Elm ecosystem. Like all of the packages in there are 100% Elm. They all are subject to this, and so they all get to benefit from this dead code elimination. So that's basically how we do it. That's sort of the trick, is just that, yeah, we just do everything in Elm and we get these amazing benefits. One of the cool things that happened in 2018 is we had like the State of Elm survey for the previous year. And one of the cool trends we've seen is that Elm is sort of like transitioning from people using it like personally as individuals, like for personal projects, side stuff, to actually starting to use it at work a lot more. So in 2017, we had like 18% of respondents said they were using Elm at work. And now that's more than doubled in 2018. And that was before Elm 19 came out and we got all the benefits I just talked about. So we expect this number to see this continue to increase, like more and more people using it actually on teams at work and getting business value out of these things instead of just having it be something they're delighted by in their spare time. So we've had a couple of talks about things like this. So at Elm Europe back in July, Emma Cunningham from Second Spectrum talked about sort of like, hey, here's some ways to like get Elm going in your community. Grant Mackey at Ford Motor Company talked about it at Elm Conf, which was last week. Talked about like some ways you can help getting started with Elm at work. If you're curious about sort of like, hey, what do some success stories look like? We've also had a bunch of these. These are 3 just from the last year. Blog posts, talks, things like that, including one company that's over 100,000 lines of Elm, so kind of a much more sizable code base, so you can kind of see the full perspective there. Okay, so earlier we talked about some of the benefits of Elm, like no runtime exceptions, delightful compiler that really helps out, cohesive package ecosystem where everything just like works really nicely together. You don't really worry about compatibility issues, and a really helpful community. And then we talked about some of the costs, learning a new language, smaller ecosystem, web API coverage, compile times, bundle sizes, and hiring. Okay, so that last one, hiring. I'm gonna tell you a little secret. That's not actually a cost, it's a benefit. So we thought this was gonna be a cost, but then it turns out that there's actually like way more people who wanna use Elm than there are companies who have actually like tried it out and started using it. So like it's actually been like our #1 source of hiring benefit for a long time. All you gotta do is basically just like make sure that people are aware that you're hiring by, for example, going to conferences and saying, we're hiring. If you're curious about that, talk to me afterwards. That's a thing that someone might do. So as long as you get the word out that you're hiring, it turns out that there's actually like a lot of like not only developers but like really great developers who are kind of like interested in like cutting edge tech, who are like excited to work for companies that are using this tech. So that one's actually not a cost. It turns out it's secretly a benefit. Bundle sizes. So again, this like kind of historically has been a cost, but now we looked at this real world example app where like, yeah, it was just like 29K, which is actually just like really, really good for an app that size. And that's, you know, not just the framework's overhead, it's like the entire application. So this has now also become something that we consider like a selling point of the language, is like really small assets. If that's something that's important to you, you should probably consider Elm. And compile times. This is another thing where like, again, historically, yeah, it was maybe a cost, but now it's sort of like, yeah, like how many people are getting sub 2-second compiles for code bases this size in JavaScript? Let alone with all of the benefits that we've got on this other column. So this is again something that we've now considered to be a benefit with the release of Elm 19. So kind of a lot of stuff changed in 2018. It's been a pretty good year for Elm. But again, I can't say that there are not still trade-offs. All of these things still exist on the other side of the cost column. So web API coverage is basically the current focus. That's like kind of what we're working on going forward, is like expanding the coverage so there's more first-class primitives like built into Elm at a language level, so you don't have to do as much JavaScript interop to access all the web APIs. Smaller ecosystem. Granted, that's probably going to be something that exists forever. I don't think there's ever going to be a time when Elm Package Ecosystem is bigger than NPM, because nothing's bigger than NPM, and that's probably going to continue. So probably the answer to that is going to be JS interop for the foreseeable future if there's something that you really need from NPM. And finally, we come to learning a new language, which seems like an excellent opportunity for a shameless plug. I'm writing a book, Elm in Action from Manning. You can get early access to that right now and start reading it. The first chapter is free. And also I did a course on front-end masters. I just updated that for Elm 19, and depending on if you're in the audience right now, I don't think it's quite out yet, but I think if you're watching at home, it probably is out by now, because I just got an email from them saying it's about done. So I'm going to leave you with this tweet from Jack Franklin. This is something he just tweeted after Elm 19 came out, and he has tried it out. He uses Elm at work. If you'd asked me 12 months ago if I would build a new product in Elm, I'd have said maybe. Now I'd say yes, very confidently. Elm 19 and the developer experience is just brilliant. And when I say brilliant, you have to imagine Jack's English, so like he would say it way cooler than I just did. Just try to picture that. Thanks very much.